Age of Wonders 4 is out, and it's my first dip into 4X gaming in many, many years. It's taken me a while to get a solid grasp on it, but I'm enjoying it a lot. It's very overwhelming. I haven't figured out what a good pace is for any given strategy. I don't really know if I'm doing well at any given moment, but I've played a few games versus the AI on normal, I've done a few story missions on normal, and I only screwed up once because I didn't pay attention to mana upkeep costs of summoned units and burned my economy to the ground in doing so while trying out a magic-based rush strategy. So I'm doing alright, but I'm definitely a beginner. All that's to say, the finer intricacies of this game's balance, can't really speak on them. I'm not good enough. Broader topics of taste and design, though, let's go. There are a couple main grievances I've seen people have with Age of Wonders 4. One is that the DLC coming down the pipe feels like it should have been part of the game at launch, that it's restoring features this entry is missing that previous entries had, rather than being truly new and exciting. I'm sure that's true, at least to some degree, but I didn't personally play previous installments, and I was gifted this game by a viewer, so I'm a little numb to the lack of value there. That sucks for fans, but I'm limited on how much I can feel it. I'm not invested in the series, I didn't even pay for the game. You get me? The other issue people have, though, is with race. Yes, this is a fantasy game, so of course there are problems surrounding race, and of course I'm going to talk about it. So, what's the problem people have with the races in Age of Wonders 4? Let's read the OP of a thread on the game's Steam community discussions page with almost 1,000 responses, because obviously this has touched on something. Races being only cosmetic is not a good idea. What is your opinion about the current races? Well, they look really cool, and I really love that you can highly customize your starting race with the help of magic and transform them into totally different beings. It still feels honestly quite disappointing that the races have absolutely no differences from each other. In my opinion, it would have been so much cooler if the game would have been a bit more faithful to the common fantasy lore, so that orcs at the start would have the better fighters, while elves would have the better mages and archers at the start, and then allow to customize the races from this start towards whatever you want, so that you can have almost immortal and tanky elves in the late game if you enchant them enough with the right magic. Enchant magic, okay. Or a mage army of fireball-throwing orcs when you researched enough evocation, because by doing so, it would feel like an roleplay achievement that you have done. But forcing every single race to play exactly the same, even including their units with the exception of tiny perks that you won't realize that they exist after the first 10 turns, at least for me, kills my sense of exploration and curiosity of playing a different race, and expecting to see something new / play a different playstyle. Such a wasted potential, in my opinion. Yeah, alright, thanks OP. Now let's translate that into human. 1. Any racial appearance being able to have any combo of racial traits makes race feel like nothing more than a skin. It feels weird that two totally different looking beings in shape and size, drastically different shape and size, can be functionally identical. 2. The racial traits don't feel impactful enough and wouldn't be significant enough to make races feel like they have character, even if they were locked to a particular appearance. This is what I'm picking up from this post and a lot of other people talking about it. Morphing your race is something people like, but they don't want the very start to be fully malleable and tweakable. They want race to be as impactful on and as distinct in the early game as your starting culture and tome are. To have it provide another layer to the feel of early game, even if drawing a game out long enough makes the initial bonuses fade away in significance. I think that's a fair assessment on my part of what's being said, and I think what's being said is 50% or more stupid. It's too samey, let me make things slightly different at the start and then get samey at the end? What do you mean? Anyway, there are problems with race in this game, but people's perspective is all janked up. There's a big dose of different equals bad and a heaping helping of misdiagnosis alongside it. Let's try to go step by step for a while. While it is true that any race can have any combo of body and mind trait, there are very clearly canon traits for each race. Default pairs the game will initially select when you click a given race, which NPC factions will also overwhelmingly stick to, with only minor deviations of one trait or the other if the gaudier who keeps that race would make sense to have tweaked them. There are two main reasons it makes perfect sense for the player to be able to choose whatever they want. One is actually lore or story based. The whole game. I don't know if this is true of the previous entries, but this one, Age of Wonders 4, the whole game is about magical eugenics, about leaders who craft races for different purposes, like tools. Throughout a match, you'll magically mold your race, and it makes sense to have some control over their starting form too. It's worth noting as well that you can only choose one race's traits per match, but you can become the keeper of more than that race during your gameplay. The ability to pick a race's traits reflects you having already had your hands on them for a while, compared with races you're encountering for the first time. Reason 2 can apply to any game like this regardless of lore, because it's more about the game as a product. Compare Age of Wonders 4 to a fantasy tabletop pen and paper game. There's probably going to be canon racial stats and whatnot, but there's nothing stopping you from doing what you want instead. The canon's written in the source books, but you can do whatever you want with it because you don't literally use the book to play. With a video game though, the source of the information and the thing you play it with are the same thing. You can't just do what you want without knowing how to mod the game if the option isn't present by default. Letting players pick whichever traits go with whichever appearance is like a step toward the game being able to function as a sandbox, and gives you the freedom a pen and paper game would, while still benefiting from the unique features and functions of a video game. Letting you remix what's there as much as possible. They're letting you do pseudo homebrewing within the limits of their assets. But being able to pick what you want doesn't change that there's clearly a canon. In other words, being able to pick any traits for any race if you want to customize doesn't remove racial character any more than saying, actually, my orcs are pink and small and furry, and they're always good and friendly, in an individual tabletop game instance changes the canon of that game. They're merely handing you the tools to do that without needing to mod anything. Here are the races. You can do what you want though, we won't stop you. All that said, people are totally right about one thing. Here's the 50% where they're not being a bit dumb. The traits are weird. A trait of a race can be that they ride spiders. Shouldn't that be more of a cultural thing? And most of the traits are just stat tweaks. Defense up, resistance up, less impact on damage when a unit loses models, harder to hit with ranged attacks, impactful mechanically. People play it down, but they are, especially those last two. They're just not interesting. I'd say the traits related to settling on certain biomes are the most characterful. The frog guys being adept at settling in swamps? Yeah, that screams frog guys to me. Better at settling underground as mole dudes? 100%. Plus defense. Now, which race screams that? I think they gave it to dwarves by default. Sure, I get it, they hunker down and fortify their position in mountains and whatever, which their other trait characterizes better, but you could easily make a flavor argument for some of the other races to have it too, when a trait is literally just plus X or minus Y stat, meaning it's less characterful. I think the biggest issue isn't that they went this way instead of another more traditional way. It's that they didn't go far enough with content. There isn't enough there, and what is there, they didn't implement quite right. The racial transformations you can cast in a match change how your units look. Imagine if all the racial traits did too. A fast reflex dwarf could look different to a fast reflex ratman, which could look different to a non-fast reflex ratman. The race would still be a skin, but it would be a more precise skin, reflecting what you've chosen. You'd know something about their racial traits from a glance, which is currently mostly lost. That's a fair bit more work for the devs though, of course. So, Paradox could have also gone with overlapping pools of traits per race instead of a total free-for-all. Imagine, for example, if all the smaller races, plus maybe the cats, feline reflexes, I don't know, could get the harder to hit with ranged perk, but no one else could. And all other traits had similar restrictions. You'd get the racial character of a more restrictive system, and you'd still get the sense that you're molding a race to your needs across at the same time. A happy medium between meaningless blob races that can be anything and rigid archetypes. Plus, it's far less work than modeling and texturing multiple racial appearance modifiers. Maybe add a perk per race that is only selectable by that race, but not mandatory. Some more impactful traits limited to a handful of races, and keep the more generic stat tweaks as a choice for any race, and provide a few more slots for picking these traits. Then I think you have something that would feel a lot nicer, while still keeping the core concept. And total freedom to pick any trait, any race could be a sandbox mode toggle in options too, to let people who want to use the game purely as a tool for doing what they want do their thing. Overall, like I said, I think the issue isn't the approach itself. It's not the concept, it's the specifics. And some of what people don't like is more of a con of the style versus evidence it's totally wrong to do things this way. Me, I like being forced to make hard choices in the creation phase of games with RPG elements. That won't really happen here. You're never going to look at a map and think, ooh, there's gonna be lots of desert provinces. Cats would be good here, but there's also this or that negative that could mess them up. Should I pick them, or go for a race that will be more middle of the road on this map, instead of having to juggle big pluses and minuses? No. The deepest you'll go is, oh, there are deserts. I could take the desert settling trait. Oh wait, never mind. Tenacious is better. As a min-maxer, I'll always crave the more crunchy cost versus benefit weighing style in any strategic game. I need to be forced to make hard choices, or I'll just go for what I think is statistically the best every time. But I can also appreciate that the way they've done it in Age of Wonders 4 demands more of your imagination. You have to exercise taste in your creation. You have to buy into any given scenario and almost roleplay as your leader, who, because it's not pure crunch, isn't just a tool to solve a problem, but more of a creative work. It's just a shame the palette they give you is so limited, because I think with more meat and a few tweaks to how it works, people who currently are bothered by it and suspect, rightly or wrongly, I don't know, that it's ideologically driven, might have bought into the approach. Ultimately, you can give up and say, I can pick anything and it won't make a mechanical difference, so it doesn't matter what I've picked. Or you can have just a crumb of self-control, as you'd have to have if you were playing something like a tabletop game where there's no computer program directly limiting your choices, and get invested in the success of your frog people who ride the spiders they used to farm in the swamp before the halflings started turning all the land they weren't comfortable settling into forest, leaving your people no choice but to migrate in search of wetter land and a means of getting their revenge. But as usual, that's just another one of my harmful opinions.